It's 21:30 GMT. I'm Darine Abougaida. In 30 minutes, Christians in the Holy Land will be holding midnight mass. On this Christmas Eve, we take you on a journey of where it all began. In one of the oldest cities in the world, a cradle of three major religions, one that's been fought over for centuries, Jerusalem. It now stands at the heart of the most intractable conflict of modern time. A city that's a powerful symbol of the Arab-Israeli conflict and a place considered sacred to Christians, Muslims and Jews in all corners of the world. In this Al Jazeera news special, we'll examine why this moment, when Donald Trump unilaterally recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital, pitted America against some of its own allies, and why the Palestinians now say the U.S. can no longer have a role in the peace process. It's a move that's made millions of people demand the U.S. reverse its decision. From Asia to Europe, Africa to the Middle East, a feeling of unity and resistance. And on the ground in the occupied territories, Palestinian resilience meets Israel's disproportionate force. We look into why Jerusalem is central to the history of Israel's illegal occupation. From north to south, east to west, the land is considered holy to billions, more than half of the world's population. We'll take you on a tour across the country, through the holy sites, past the checkpoints, and over the wall that separates families. And on the sacred eve, when many people believe Jesus Christ was born, we find out the hopes and dreams of people living in the Holy Land and explore what the future holds for a conflict that touches millions across the world. We begin with Harry Fawcett, who has the story of the three major Abrahamic religions, one city and multiple claims.
Bounded by its ancient walls, this tiny patch of land has, for millennia, borne a power that has spread far beyond them. The stories of the three Abrahamic faiths have Jerusalem at their heart, and the history of their sometimes tolerant, often bloody relationship has soaked into the stones. A walk westward along the Via Dolorosa, where Christ carried his cross, brings you, after some twists and turns, to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It's here where Jesus is said to have been brought down from the cross, his body cleaned and entombed, before his resurrection 3 days later. George Hentlian took over from his father as secretary to the Armenian Patriarchate, one of three denominations that manages the site. He's had a bond with the place since boyhood.
This is the central monument of the Christians in the world. I think 2 billion Christians, whether they are Protestant or Orthodox and Catholic, see in this place as the most important place where, rightfully so, because the defining moments of the last week of Christ took place within this building.
But he says it's part of a larger religious monument, the city itself, one that shouldn't be politicized.
Suddenly, this signature of Trump makes the issue of Jerusalem contestable. So it's our duty and our mission as residents of Jerusalem, both Israelis and others, to bring this issue of Jerusalem outside contestation.
In his recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital, the US president spoke of continued freedom of worship for all faiths, with final political borders to be decided. But many here see in the president's unabashed backing of Israel's claim a cementing of Israeli control over Islam's third holiest site.
So this is one of the main entrances to the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. The mosque itself is run by the Jordanian-backed Islamic Waqf, but the entrances to it are guarded by Israeli forces, and they can restrict access at their will.
Palestinian academic Mahdi Abdelhadi likens it to a rope being let out and withdrawn on a whim, a feeling magnified by the Trump declaration.
The real thing, which is my nightmare, if Israel today is going to translate such a declaration to implement what they claim sovereignty over the city, meaning to take over the site and to abort my presence and kick us out of the city.
For the Muslim faith, this is the most closely connected place to heaven. Prayers made here have the shortest route to God. That's because it's from here that the Prophet Muhammad himself is said to have ascended to heaven.
We believe that Prophet Muhammad came all the way from Mecca, ascended to heaven, received his revelation. Coming to Jerusalem is a serious historical religious message to us and to the world. We belong here, it's part of us.
It's really when you get up to the level of the skyline here in Jerusalem that you get a full idea of just how concentrated are the markers of the hundreds of years of religious history here. Those grey domes behind me are the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where Jesus Christ is believed to have been laid to rest. And just a few hundred meters walk away, you can see the gold of the Dome of the Rock, which is in the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound where Muslims come to pray every Friday. And just beyond that is the Western Wall.
For Jews, the Dome of the Rock sits upon the Temple Mount, site of the first and second Jewish temples. The Western Wall is the closest point at which they can pray, its stones themselves said to be vested with divinity. A rabbi and former opposition member of the Israeli parliament, the Knesset, Dov Lipman, says this place embodies the Jewish connection to God and to Jerusalem.
And for 2,000 years, we were in exile, went from country to country, continent to continent, but 3 times a day, Jews turned towards Jerusalem to pray. Twice a year in the most important moments, we said next year in Jerusalem.
Since seizing East Jerusalem in 1967, Israel has been trying to cement that connection with archaeological work that it says proves the temple's historical existence, but which the United Nations has ruled illegal in occupied territory. For Lipman, it's a necessity to counter rejections of Jewish history here.
When we hear President Trump's declaration, we celebrate the fact that someone somewhere in the world is giving recognition to the capital, which has been our capital for 3,000 years, the heart and soul of the Jewish people, our right as an independent country to declare our capital. But he left room open for those negotiations to figure out what exactly that means when we say Jerusalem is the Jewish capital.
For thousands of years, Jerusalem has changed hands, the subject of a continuing struggle for control. This latest chapter in that history has had its narrative shifted by the US president, its eventual resolution seeming only to slip further into the future of this holy city.
So that report from Harry Fawcett, who's now at the Notre Dame Church, that's in West Jerusalem. We have Malcolm Webb in Gaza. That is where the number of Christians in the besieged strip has seen a drastic decline over the years. And we have Huda Abdelhamid. She's joining us from Bethlehem, where Christians believe that Jesus Christ was born. Huda, so as we head closer to the midnight mass, talk us through the mood this Christmas Eve and what message Bethlehem is sending out to the world.
Well, I think the mood is as damp as the weather on this Christmas Eve. Now, celebrations have been going ahead like every year. This is a message of defiance that Bethlehem wants to send out. You know, the city has been the scene of quite violent and intense clashes between the youth and Israeli soldiers for the past 3 weeks, ever since the declaration of Jerusalem. Well, today, none of that happened. Bethlehem is showing a united front. Certainly, there is a bittersweet taste to this Christmas, much less tourists, many cancellations, Palestinians who wanted to come here who couldn't make it, and certainly a lot of worry looking forward at what the new year could bring.
It does become the center of the epicenter for Catholics, not only from Palestine as well as Israel, but Christians coming from all over the world. So what do they face trying to get into Bethlehem?
Well, it's certainly, I mean, tourists, for them, it will be quite easily. They would come, they usually are based mostly in Jerusalem, and they would come here with their buses. You have some pilgrims who like to stay here in Bethlehem. But for Palestinians, it's a much more complicated matter. Certainly, occupation really is present in every aspect of your daily life if you live across the occupied West Bank. And traveling from A to B is not so easy. You need to go over many hurdles. So take a look at how you can travel from Ramallah to Bethlehem and Jerusalem. This checkpoint is the closest point to Jerusalem many Palestinians can get to, unless they have a special permit, and in that case they will have to go through the walking terminal, because here only cars with a yellow license plate, that means that they're allowed to get to the other side, can go through. Now, it will be also much shorter to go from here to Bethlehem, about half an hour drive, but because we don't have the proper license plate, we will have to take a much longer route. So this is a road where cars with both Israeli or Palestinian license plate can travel through. But there are certain roads that are forbidden to Palestinians, like the one there, just across the roundabout. Now, you can only drive through that area if you have the yellow Israeli license plate, and if you're Palestinian, of course, you would need a special permit. There's a whole network of segregated roads, and with that comes entire areas that are non-accessible to Palestinians, even though within the occupied West Bank, and usually those are around the illegal settlements. Also, many roads have been diverted because of the wall. Israel has built the separation wall in the name of security. It runs more than 700 kilometers, and it basically traps in Palestinians, limiting their freedom of movement. Look at those buildings on the other side of the wall. That's East Jerusalem. Palestinians claim it as the capital of their future state. And in the background, if this was a better day, you could see the bright, shiny Dome of the Rock. So it took us about an hour and a half to reach Bethlehem. Now here, the separation wall is part of your daily life. It cuts right through the city from the north. Now, we want to go to Jerusalem, and it should be about a 15-minute drive. However, because we are in the West Bank, we need to go first through this fortified checkpoint. Palestinians living in Jerusalem or inside Israel can easily come here. But for those living in the West Bank, it's much more difficult, and they have to go through this grueling security check. It feels like coming out of a prison. About 75,000 workers go through checkpoints like this one every day. So we made it here. Israel does grant special permission for religious occasions, for example, Easter for the Christians or Ramadan for the Muslims. But most of the year, Palestinians can't simply come and visit the city they view as their capital.
Well, we'll now talk to Harry Fawcett. He's joining us from West Jerusalem. And Jerusalem, the heart of this conflict. Harry, to what extent has the decision by the U.S. President Donald Trump to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital affected the Christmas spirit there?
Well, it certainly affected it. I mean, people here, Christians here, are preparing to celebrate Christmas as they do every year. We've just had church bells ringing out through the rain across the old city, which is just 100 meters or so away from where we're standing. And here at the Notre Dame Church, they are preparing to have a midnight mass with some hundreds of people in attendance. Obviously, the main focus is not here in Jerusalem on Christmas. It's in Bethlehem, where Jesus is believed to have been born, as opposed to here, where obviously Easter is a bigger occasion. But nonetheless, there are numerous Christians here who are preparing to celebrate this very special religious festival, at the same time as they're also having to deal with the fallout from this Trump declaration. We've been speaking to people attached to the Holy Sepulchre Church, for instance, who are saying that really it's putting, as you heard in that package, putting this city up for political contestation at a time when really the three faiths should be thinking about more spiritual matters.
And one of the reasons Palestinians have reacted so strongly about this declaration is because they say that they see it as giving cover to what Israel is doing on the ground, i.e. accusing Israel of cementing its control over Jerusalem.
Well, that's right. I mean, there are various things that the Palestinians have been protesting about in relation to this Trump declaration. I mean, one of them, there's quite a lot of attention on the case of a young 17-year-old girl, Ahed Tamimi, who faces military court tomorrow for alleged assault against an Israeli soldier. There was a viral video of her slapping a soldier, and then she was taken from her home, arrested in the dead of night shortly thereafter by Israeli forces, Israeli politicians saying all sorts of things, from the fact that she should be seeing out her days in prison, to an Israeli commentator, a journalist, saying that things should be done to such people in the dead of night when no one is watching. So obviously there is a great deal of outrage among Palestinians on that front. And also, as you say, more generally about the situation in East Jerusalem. The reason that the political declaration by Trump is seen as so important, or at least partly, is because many fear that they're already losing East Jerusalem because of various measures being taken or at least being threatened by the Israeli government on the ground while Israel remains in full control of Jerusalem since it has since 1967. And so we went to one particularly sensitive place to explore that issue, that being the Shwafat refugee camp.
It's within the city limits, but out on its own. Shufat refugee camp is cut off from the rest of Jerusalem by the Israeli separation barrier. The Israeli government provides few services here. The Palestinian Authority isn't permitted to provide any. Local activist Abdullah Alkam says many of his neighbors do at least have one thing: official status as residents of occupied East Jerusalem.
This identity card means a lot for us: the right of return, our existence in Jerusalem, our daily connection, our children and our workers, our businesses and our mosques and churches.
Now Israel's Jerusalem Affairs Minister is proposing to redefine the camp and other Palestinian neighborhoods outside the wall as no longer part of the city, to be governed instead under a new regional municipality. Betty Hirschman from Jerusalem campaign group Ir Amim says the objective is clear.
It would allow Israel to shift 120,000 Palestinians who are roughly 1/3 of the entire Palestinian population of East Jerusalem from the city.
That's one half of the equation. The other is to increase Jerusalem's Jewish population by counting in some 140,000 Israeli settlers in the occupied West Bank. It's all part of a two-pronged strategy to change the demographics of Jerusalem, not just redesignating tens of thousands of Palestinians as outside the city's boundaries, but also integrating illegal settlements here in the West Bank into the Jerusalem municipality. In October, the Israeli Prime Minister was in one of those settlements, promoting the plan known as the Greater Jerusalem Bill.
This place will be a part of the State of Israel. I support the Greater Jerusalem Bill, which will enable Jerusalem and its surroundings to develop in very many aspects.
But plans to put it to a cabinet vote recently were shelved, Netanyahu citing pressure from the US administration as it formulates its peace plan. Khalil Tafakci has mapped Jerusalem's shifting lines for more than 30 years. He sees a long-term Israeli plan coming to fruition.
It means that we have 12% of, in this area, 12% Palestinian and 88% Jewish. So if we speak about the capital of Israel, the capital of Israel will be inside Israel.
That's why this plan carries such high stakes. The Palestinian Authority, which claims East Jerusalem as the capital of a future Palestinian state, says it would destroy any prospect of a two-state solution. Harry Fawcett, Al Jazeera, occupied East Jerusalem.
Well, Christians are an integral part of Palestinian society. However, Israel's wars on Palestinian territories have pushed many out. Worldwide, there are hundreds of thousands of Palestinian Christians, but only a small percentage have remained in the territories. Malcolm Webb went to Gaza to find out how they're making the best of a very difficult situation.
This is all of Rosette Sayer's extended family that will gather this Christmas. Her son went to the occupied West Bank 3 years ago and never came back. He took his two sons, worried for their future here in Gaza. One of her daughters moved to Canada 6 years ago.
Life is very difficult in Gaza. We live under siege and we cannot move anywhere. Gaza has become a big prison. We've witnessed many wars. During the bombing, we had to sleep in the church for safety.
The story of Rosette's family is typical among Gaza's small community of Christians. They gather in just 3 churches. Congregations are shrinking. Their population's just over 1,000. It was more than double that 10 years ago when the blockade by Israel and Egypt began. They suffer the same daily struggles as the Muslim majority, but sociologists say Christian families tend to have more means to get out.
Christian family in Gaza usually has high socio-economic level. And I think the more the human being has options and the more has money, and he look to the better life and good life. And this is good life is not available in Gaza. Even you has money in Gaza, but you can't lead a happy life.
And adding to the strife is the US recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. Here in this community centre, Christians are holding a vigil in solidarity for Jerusalem as Palestine's capital. The feeling among the Christian community is very much the same as it is among the Muslim majority. Everyone we've spoken to here is in opposition to the US move, and they say it only adds to the frustrations of life here. There are many Muslims here too. The communities coexist. Issa Saba runs the centre. He says they do everything they can to try and provide support for all young people.
They cannot do what they need or what they must do in their life as other young youth in the world. You can see a lot of them who want to leave, to find another places more secure, more comfortable for them. They can find work and so on.
Many young people here say they like Gaza, just that on the siege there are no opportunities here. Almost anyone who can leaves, and so this small Christian community is getting smaller.
Well, for more on how Christians in Gaza are marking Christmas Eve, we'll now cross over to Malcolm Webb, who's joining us from there. Malcolm.
I'm sorry, the line's gone bad. Can you say it again?
Can you hear me, Malcolm? I'm just asking you how Christians in Gaza are marking this Christmas Eve.
Sure, well, for many years, Christians here have told us that Christmas has been a very humble affair because of security concerns. But normally it begins with Mass at about 7 o'clock in the evening, and that lasts for about an hour. After Mass, typically there are celebrations, games for children, cakes and tea and so on. This year, those celebrations aren't happening. They've been cancelled in solidarity with Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine. But we've gathered with a group of young men here who we met at the YMCA, at the Christian Community Centre that we saw in the story just a short while ago. But these men here are both Christians and Muslims. The two communities are quite integrated here, but we got them together so we could talk a little bit about Christmas and about life in general in Gaza. And one of the things that we've learned here is that Christians here say if they really want to get into the Christmas spirit, they try to travel to Bethlehem in the occupied West Bank. But Gaza, of course, is besieged. It's surrounded by a wall and a fence, which is controlled by Israel. So, Rami, I'm going to ask you, what do you have to do if you want to visit Bethlehem for Christmas?
Of course, like the Christmas there is the Christmas here. We don't have that Christmas because Christmas is a season and it's an atmosphere that happens all the way in December and January. And sadly, it's like Bethlehem, it's only 90 minutes away from here, but unfortunately, we need permits to go there, and we didn't get the permit. The Israeli side only issued less than 40% of the permits this year, and many people didn't get a chance to go to Jerusalem, to Bethlehem, to celebrate Christmas. So we are staying in Gaza, and that's a Christmas for us, and the celebration is only in indoor places with families and the church mainly, but this year, as you said, because we are being solidarity with the situation, so that's Christmas.
And do you apply every year?
Yeah, every year I apply. This year I didn't get the permit. Sadly, I didn't get it. Yes.
And Hannah, let me ask you, it's Christmas. What's your wish for 2018 and the year ahead?
Well, as a young Palestinian Christian, we have a lot of dreams and aspirations, especially for the coming new year. As young people living in Gaza, we only wish now for to have a secure job, to have access to good education, to have the rights to freedom of movement. So those are considered basic human rights anywhere else in the world, and so hopefully this year we can get maybe our basic human rights for change this year.
Cool, thank you very much. So these are some of the concerns at Christmas time among the Christian community in Gaza. Back to you in Doha, Doreen.
All right, Malcolm, thank you, and Merry Christmas to you as well as your guests. Well, we can now cross over to Washington, D.C. and speak to Noor Arekat. She's a human rights lawyer and an assistant professor at George Mason University. Thanks very much for joining us on Al Jazeera. So I was just talking to our reporters in Gaza, in Bethlehem, as well as in Jerusalem. They were giving us a sense of what's going on in the ground. And I think the message that they were sending through is that there really is a show of unity and defiance this Christmas across the occupied territories. But certainly Palestinians will have difficult days ahead as a result of this declaration by the U.S.
Absolutely. I think one of the things that has been missed in the entire coverage of Trump's insolent announcement is that this is a really devastating, emotional thing for Palestinians who are prepared to celebrate Eid. Christmas is Eid for a significant part of the population, which is Christian, and yet here this declaration comes in a way that further dehumanizes this celebratory moment and deems inconsequential and irrelevant the needs, the emotions, the feelings, the subjectivity of these millions of Palestinians who are basically trapped in limbo as non-sovereigns of their own state and, frankly, non-civilians under what Israel deems is not really a de jure occupation. And so the toll of that is quite heavy, and we haven't seen a lot of what that I really appreciate what Al Jazeera is doing, but most other outlets have covered, have been concerned about Palestinians' rage and the days of rage, and only concerned about the threat that Palestinian anger will pose, but not on any of the suffering that Palestinians actually endure. And that narrative works to reify this idea that Palestinians exist only in the shadow of Israel, but not as their own persons in their own peoplehood, which is the crux of the issue.
Allow me to just shift our attention for a moment to the sort of diplomatic sphere. And what we saw is the Palestinian leadership now coming out and saying that they will not use or allow the U.S. to be a mediator anymore. Is the Palestinian leadership correct when they take such a stand?
First of all, I hope that's absolutely true and that this is not a veiled threat. And in fact, the Palestinian Authority is committed to maintaining this position. It is the absolute basic minimum that the Palestinian leadership needs to do. It should have done it since 2001 when the peace process fell apart at the height of the Second Palestinian Uprising, or the Al-Aqsa Intifada. The United States, up until 1967, was not necessarily a key player on the question of Palestine. But in 1967, under the Lyndon B. Johnson administration, the U.S. upped its relationship to Israel and became its primary lawyer and protector. In a way, it saw Israel as affording it a very convenient and critical proxy ally in its war with the Soviet Union for hegemonic control of the Middle East in the Cold War.
Right,
and
so allow me, but having said that, having said that, then, Israel presumably will not accept anyone but the U.S. to be a mediator. So this is going to put the Palestinians in a tough spot.
That was the Palestinian thinking and why Arafat, from 1973 onwards, angled to have a direct line to the United States as a mediator. They got that opportunity in 1993. We've had 2 decades and a half to bear witness to the fact that even though the United States is one of the only countries in the world that can bear pressure on Israel, it has been unable and unwilling to do so. That's a result of its own domestic politics, but it's also the result of its own foreign policy. So even if this might be the best chance that the Palestinians have, we have 25 years demonstrating that it doesn't work. And so now we need a plan B. And maybe that plan B is not as optimal, but it'll certainly be better than this dismal outcome that the United States has been able to provide.
All right, Noor Arekat, we thank you for joining us on Al Jazeera, speaking to us from Washington. And we'll just take a moment right now and listen to the bells ringing for midnight mass. Mass taking place right now at the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, built on the spot where it is believed that Jesus was born. Let's listen for a minute. So the bells have just rung at midnight mass in Bethlehem at the Church of the Nativity. That church built on the spot where it is believed that Jesus was born, and Palestinian officials as well as pilgrims attending midnight mass in Bethlehem. Now, public opinion of the U.S. has plummeted once Trump made his announcement. A new survey done by the Palestinian Center for Survey and Policy shows that 91%, that's 9 out of 10 Palestinians, feel the U.S.'s decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital is a threat to their interests. About 45% want the Palestinian Authority to stop all contact with the U.S. administration, file a complaint with the International Criminal Court, and return to armed resistance. And now people in favor of armed resistance as a way to establish a Palestinian state has jumped from 35 to 44%. Well, at the same time, support for negotiations has dropped from 33 to 27%. And Trump's move seems to have dented Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas's popularity as well. 70% want him to resign. Isa Qassisiya is the Palestinian ambassador to the Holy See, and speaking from the Vatican, I asked him what the next move for the Palestinian Authority will be.
Our president said that we will use all peaceful tools to rebuff such a decision, and already we took the right steps by going, to the international body, to the United Nations, to the Security Council, to the General Assembly, and we are continuing our path by knocking the door of the international community.
Just about a quarter, in fact, 27% of your population, the Palestinian population, now say that they support negotiations going forward. How much does the Palestinian Authority agree or disagree with the population, and do you see a way forward for negotiations?
In the near future, there will be a meeting by the Central Council, by the whole leadership of the State of Palestine and by the PLO, of course. And there, the right decisions will be taken, strategic decisions will be taken.
What type of decisions are going to be taken? What decisions will you be looking for to be taken? What concrete decisions?
Well, strategically since 1988, we stick to our vision for the two-state solution on the border of 67. By Trump's unilateral decision, it seems, this formula is fading up, and here it's the decision of the leadership to revisit their strategy of two-state solution. And anyhow, to be frank with you, because I live in Jerusalem, I live in the occupied state of Palestine, I see that we are going towards an imposed one-state solution by a state of Israel, by their practices, by their
So when the chief Palestinian negotiator, Saeb Erekat, says that it's time to transform, when Saeb Erekat says that it's time to transform the struggle for one state with equal rights for everyone living in historic Palestine from the river to the sea, do you agree with that?
Israel is taking us to this direction, and nowadays, we're living, two systems, one system for the settlers and the other system for the Palestinians, and it seems that, we're going to ask, for different alternatives, and at the end, Israel and Mr. Netanyahu should look at me, at my eyes, and tell me what he will do to me. I'm there to stay in my city, in my country, and I'm rooted there. My identity is there, and I won't move from there. So
let me ask you
at
about
the end,
Pope
we
Francis.
will continue to struggle for justice and for peace and dignity, no doubt about it. But the best option for us would continue to be the two-state solution.
Let me ask you about Pope Francis. He's come out and he's spoken about this decision, saying that Jerusalem must be preserved. The status of Jerusalem, that is, must be preserved. Do you think that the Vatican has taken a strong enough stance?
Let us remember that 2 years ago they signed a comprehensive agreement with us, and they recognized the state of Palestine on the borders of 67. And, with the latest development, His Holiness said himself that he doesn't accept the decision or the declaration, the recognition of Trump to Jerusalem. And the Vatican, as it is the case with all the churches, they ask to maintain the status quo, and they refuse the exclusivity, and they refuse to make Jerusalem with one color, and their position is our position.
What is your message on Christmas Eve to Palestinians who are in Jerusalem, who are in Bethlehem?
We have to keep in mind that Jerusalem, for the first time, since 2,000 years, is separated from Bethlehem. That means the Holy Sepulchre is separated from the Nativity Church by this annexation wall. And what I say to the world, that they should hear to the voice of our children. They should hear the voice of our children where they ask for freedom and dignity, and they want to live as others in dignity and in freedom and in peace. And what we are working for is justice for the Holy Land, is justice for our people, is justice for the future, is justice for our children.
So that was the ambassador to the Holy See speaking to me earlier on, and we'll show you Bethlehem and in fact show you the scene in the Vatican in just a moment, but take a look at Bethlehem, where the bells just rang the midnight for marking midnight mass about 6 minutes ago or so. So that's the scene from the Church of the Nativity inside Bethlehem, and we'll show you what's happening at the Vatican City. Bells will ring there in less than an hour's time, marking Christmas and celebrating the birth of Jesus. And we do expect Pope Francis, of course, to conduct the traditional midnight mass, and that'll take place in St. Peter's Basilica in less than an hour's time. Well, we'll continue our focus on Jerusalem and the repercussions of Donald Trump's unilateral decision to declare it as Israel's capital. Priyanka Gupta digs deeper into how a series of events over the past century, in fact, have shaped today's developments in the contested city.
The status of Jerusalem is at the heart of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict and is hugely symbolic for both sides. And to understand why, we need to go back 70 years. That's when a UN vote in 1947 carved up Palestinian land into two states, a Jewish one and an Arab one. Under this partition plan, Jerusalem was given a special international status under the UN. But a year later, Israel declared itself a state, triggering the first Arab-Israeli war. That's when it captured more territory, leading to the division of Jerusalem. West Jerusalem came under Israeli control, that's marked in green over there, and East Jerusalem came under Jordanian rule, that's in red. Then in 1967, after a 6-day war, Israel occupied East Jerusalem. And it's still under Israeli control, despite UN resolutions saying it's illegal. Fast forward 13 years later, in 1980, Israel further consolidated its grip over the city. Its parliament declared Jerusalem as its eternal and indivisible capital. But the international community rejected that. Now, Palestinians see East Jerusalem as the capital of the future state. But it's not just a Palestinian issue. Jerusalem holds religious and symbolic significance for the world's 3 major faiths: Islam, Judaism, and Christianity. The Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Western Wall, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre are all in Jerusalem.
And now we can speak to Robbie Sable. He's joining us from West Jerusalem. He's the former legal advisor to the Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs. He's currently a professor of international relations at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Thanks for joining us on Al Jazeera. So the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, has called the moment that Donald Trump declared Jerusalem as Israel's capital a festive and unifying moment for Israel. Yet it hasn't really unified Israel with the rest of the international community. We saw the UNGA come out with a resolution overwhelmingly disagreeing, in fact, with the decision the United States has taken. So is it a little bit premature for Israel to be joyful over this decision?
First of all, I'd like to wish all the viewers a very happy Christmas. I'm speaking from a very peaceful Jerusalem, and I hope we have a peaceful New Year. The President Trump's declaration was welcomed here because Jerusalem is Israel's capital. It has been Israel's capital now for nearly 70 years. It's recognized by all states as the capital in the sense that all foreign ambassadors present their credentials to the Israeli president
in Jerusalem. They sign treaties in Jerusalem. The ambassadors include the ambassadors of Egypt and Jordan, all present their credentials to the Israeli president in Jerusalem. It's Israel's capital. It's also important to look at what was not said in President Trump's declaration. He recognized the reality, Jerusalem is Israel's capital. He did not make any reference to East Jerusalem or to the holy sites. And I think it's worth recalling that Israel has stated in the past that we're willing to negotiate a special status for the holy sites, and Israel is still willing to negotiate it. For that, of course, we need a partner willing to sit down and negotiate with us. And if I can add, on a personal note, I grew up in Jerusalem with a wall dividing East and West Jerusalem, with the Jordanian Legion holding the other side. I don't think anybody in the world wants to come back to a situation where Jerusalem is divided by a wall. We need to negotiate, and I'm optimistic that we can reach, I don't know how soon, but we can reach a peaceful settlement.
No one believes that this decision, Robbie Sable, is a starting point for any sort of negotiations. On the contrary, a lot of people say that this just gives Israel the green light to be able to grab more land in Jerusalem. And we've just seen Israel as well announcing new settlements that they're going to build in eastern Jerusalem specifically.
What President Trump recognized was the reality. Every state declares what its capital is. Jerusalem is our capital. But again, I'd like to emphasize, we're aware that we have something here that is holy for Christians, holy to Muslims, and we can negotiate a special status for that, and we're willing to do it. Again, the settlement issue is a difficult issue. We've agreed with the Palestinians in the 1993 Oslo Agreement, that is one of the issues that we will negotiate. And there's no other way. The UN is not going to provide a solution to it. It can help. Europe can help. The United States can help. The only people who can actually solve the problem are the Israelis and the Arab Palestinians, and we'll have to sit together and negotiate.
Netanyahu says, and I believe you just said it, that you're almost implying that there is freedom of worship in Jerusalem. However, we both know, and you're in Jerusalem, and I've been to Jerusalem as well, there are policies designed to make life very, very difficult for Palestinians, and especially Palestinian Christians who want to enter Jerusalem and visit the holy sites.
I think it's true to say that only under the Israeli administration has Jerusalem been open for all religions. It's worth recalling that under the Jordanian administration, it was not open to it. Israel has opened it, and there's freedom of religion, complete freedom of religion in Jerusalem. I'm speaking here in a Catholic monastery, and not far from us are Jewish synagogues and Muslim holy places, and we can and we will continue to live peacefully together.
Robbie Sable, we thank you for speaking to us from West Jerusalem.
Thank you, and again, Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas, thank you. Well, in his speech, Donald Trump called Jerusalem, quote, the heart of one of the most successful democracies of the world, where people of all faiths are free to live. That's not a view shared by human rights organizations or Palestinians in occupied East Jerusalem. Almost 300,000 of them living there hold a residency ID card but no passport, effectively meaning they are stateless, neither citizens of Palestine nor Israel. Israel can cancel their residency card with the United Nations, saying more than 14,000 Palestinians have had their residencies revoked by Israel since 1967. Now, rules are different for Jews coming from any part of the world. They can live in the country and obtain Israeli citizenship under Israeli law. Then there's the issue of illegal settlements and their ongoing expansion, which cramps Palestinians into small pockets of territory with lack of basic civic amenities like water. At least 140,000 Palestinians in East Jerusalem are disconnected from the rest of the city because of Israel's separation wall. It cuts right through Palestinian neighborhoods, and it's affected families too. For example, if you're from Gaza or the occupied West Bank and you're married to someone from East Jerusalem, then you are almost always prohibited from getting a permanent residency card. That's part of a 2003 law passed by Israel's parliament. So you're essentially separated from your spouse based on where you're from. We'll now cross over to Haifa and speak to Diana Bhutto. She's a human rights lawyer and a former legal advisor to the PLO. Thanks very much for joining us on Al Jazeera. So if you heard me speaking to Robbie Sable just a moment ago, he was saying that the United States is simply recognizing the reality. What is your response to that?
That's absolutely incorrect. What the United States is doing is it's actually recognizing theft, and it's promoting theft, and it's encouraging theft. It's important to keep in mind that Jerusalem was never once allocated to be Israel's capital, not East, not West Jerusalem. And what they've now done is they've given the green light to Israel to continue to build and expand settlements, to continue to kick Palestinians out of their town of Jerusalem. And it's also given the green light to continue Israel's illegal behavior, not just in East Jerusalem, but also throughout the rest of the West Bank. So what President Trump has done is he's basically said to Israel, go ahead, continue to violate international law. We've not only got your back, but we're going to reward you as well.
So where does this all leave then Palestinian options, not just the authority, but other factions as well? What do you see as a solution going forward?
Look, I think the only way forward is for this Palestinian Authority or any future leadership to start focusing on things that do work. And what works is to be pushing for boycotts, to be pushing for Israel's divestment from Israel, and to be pushing for sanctions on Israel, and also to be pushing to hold Israel accountable. To continue along this false path of negotiations, I was part of this, and I know that they were futile, is going to lead to nowhere. And this is why the Israelis keep insisting on having negotiations. They want to continue to beat up on a weaker party. They want to continue to build and expand settlements, and they want us to simply swallow it. Instead, what the strategy should be is abandon negotiations, push to hold Israel accountable, and be pushing for boycotts, for divestment, and sanctions. These are the types of things that will work, and they worked in South Africa. They will also work with apartheid Israel.
You've also said that Israel is spinning this conflict into a religious one strategically. How so?
Well, what they've been trying to do for quite some time is they're trying to blur the fact that they are a colonizer, that there has been a land theft, and that they have not only stolen land, but they've ethnically cleansed the people who are part of that land. I mean, it's important for us to keep in mind today, as we're talking on Christmas, that Israel has ethnically cleansed Christians from the birthplace of Christianity. And so what Israel instead tries to do is they try to turn this into a religious conflict so that it makes it seem like it's intractable. It makes it seem like this is just one of competing religions, when it's not. It's one of Israel's occupation, colonization, and ethnic cleansing. And once we recognize that, we'll move away from these simple trifle statements that somehow this has to do with religion when it doesn't. One thing that was very interesting with your previous speaker was that he was talking about the fact that he lived during a time when there was a wall in Jerusalem. Well, maybe he should wake up and realize that there is right now a wall in Jerusalem, and what that wall does is it separates Palestinians from Palestinians. It's a wall that is based in Jerusalem that is entirely designed to separate Palestinian Christians and Muslims from their holy sites. And as we heard from other guests this evening, even Gazans who are trying to come out to celebrate one of the most holy days for them are being barred from doing so because Israel believes in the concept of Israeli and Jewish superiority and doesn't believe in the concept of equality.
All right, Diana Bhutto, thank you for speaking to us from Haifa. Now, Jordan, a staunch U.S. ally in the region, has called Trump's decision null and void. The Hashemite kingdom that rules the country is the custodian of the holy sites of Jerusalem. It's one of 57 Muslim countries that declared East Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine at a summit called by Turkey earlier this month. Joining us from Amman is the former Deputy Prime Minister of Jordan, Jawad Al-Anani. Thank you very much for talking to us on Al Jazeera. So Jordan, too, has a stake in Jerusalem, as I'm saying, as a custodian of the holy sites. But at the same time, Jordan is economically dependent on the United States. So this puts the government and the king in a tough position.
Well, thank you very much. I think that Jordan has been a custodian of the holy places. However, I would like to caution against the fact that we should not reduce the issue of Palestine and the issue of Jerusalem only to a religious matter. It is a political and a human rights issue. Your gentleman who spoke from West Jerusalem tried to show it as if it was just mere religious rights. Religious rights, of course, have their own sanctity, and we should respect them very much. And the Hashemite family, of course, is the custodian of the King Abdullah of the Second of Jordan, is the custodian of holy places.
But ever
the issue of
since Trump
Jerusalem
took
goes
his
beyond
decision
that.
to declare Jerusalem as Israel's capital, we've seen Jordan take a tough stance. But how long can it continue with that stance, seeing that it is dependent on U.S. economic aid? And is Jordan worried that the U.S. will follow through on its threat to cut off foreign aid to countries who voted against the U.S. at that UN General Assembly resolution, in which Jordan, of course, did?
Well, I agree with you that the aid to Jordan is an important part of the total aid which Jordan receives from the outside. But in terms of percentage to the GDP or even to the budget, in terms of budget, the allocations barely add up to 15%. And in terms of the GDP, they are only probably 3% or 2%. So in a way, when you say that Jordan is dependent on the U.S. foreign aid, of course, as much as it is important, as well as the aid from other countries, but it still is not, does not make Jordan solely dependent on that source.
You yourself were involved in the peace process between Jordan and Israel. Would you say that the peace process, the peace deal, excuse me, still has support in Jordan today?
Yes, I agree with you that Jordan right now, if you go back a little bit to 1991, when the architecture of the negotiations was made, the Palestinian-related issues were divided into two stages. There was the interim stage, and there was the final status negotiations. Now, the Israeli government at that time, although it was a right-wing government, had accepted the fact that Jerusalem was something to be negotiated within the framework of final negotiations. Now, Jordan sticks to that position, believes that Jerusalem is an occupied territory, especially East Jerusalem, and that for Israel to be accepted as a country with Jerusalem, West Jerusalem as its capital, they also must come to recognize that East Jerusalem is the Palestinian capital.
All right. We thank you very much for joining us from Amman in Jordan.
Thank you.
Now, a symbol of religious coexistence in the Holy Land includes a centuries-old tradition. Muslim families have played the role of the guardian of the many churches in the occupied territories. It dates back to the time of the liberation of Jerusalem from the Crusaders.
My name is Adib Jude al-Husseini. I'm the keyholder of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem and the holder of the stamp of the Holy Tomb. The story of my family began in 1187 when Salahuddin al-Ayyubi liberated the city of Jerusalem from the Crusaders. The sects agreed, and from 1187 until today, we have been holding the keys of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. We have preserved it with our blood and soul. It is our second home. My job is not just an honorable job, and it is not just the heritage of my family as a Muslim family. It is the heritage to all Muslims across the world that a Muslim family has held and preserved the church for 850 years. It is a feeling that cannot be described, and I envy myself for being the keyholder of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. I have been opening the door of the Holy Sepulchre Church since I was 8 years old, and today I am 53. For more than 40 years I've had this responsibility. My father gave me the seal of the grave when I was 12 years old, and I sealed the tomb. Now I have 3 children, and I've started teaching them. Sometimes I open, sometimes they open. The keys of the Holy Sepulchre Church are in the custody of the Jude al-Husseini family, and hopefully this will last forever. My family received 2 keys from Salahuddin al-Ayyubi because there were 2 doors. Every door had 2 locks, 2 doors, 4 locks. One key opens 4 locks. The key broke 500 years ago, so we use the second one. We don't want to leave the Holy Sepulchre Church. It is captive, just like Al-Aqsa Mosque. It's the same thing. We are peace callers. We hope and pray for peace to come to our region. From here, from the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the light of Islamic-Christian coexistence emerged. We lived with them, and we have known them since childhood. We are in the same trenches, we have the same pain and suffering. We have the same feeling. These churches are also Arab churches, not just Palestinian. We are not just brothers in ethnicity, but also in blood.
Back to Bethlehem to listen to the sermon by the Archbishop Pier Battista Pizzaballa.
Difficult land, full of history, traditions, places, land which is witness of the history of revelation, lands that talks to billions of believers all over the world. And we are called here as inhabitants of this land, not to possess it, but to serve it. What we do here is a service for all humanity, not just for ourselves. Pope Francis said, repeating what many others said before him, is not new, that Jerusalem is a city of peace. There is no peace if someone is excluded. Jerusalem should include, not excluded. The mother, Jerusalem is our mother, loves all her children. If one is missing, the mother cannot be in peace. So we have to pray for the peace of Jerusalem according to what the Psalm says. But we have to continue, otherwise we go too much in politics. We have to remain in our religious dimension. We are praying, we have to pray on the gospel today. Another thing I need to say to all the politicians, I'm not thinking about you, don't worry. To all those that have the power to decide our future, to have courage, not to fear, to dare, to try, to risk, not to fear to being alone, not to abandon each one vision. We need vision. We need vision. Today, even more than ever, we need from you, from all those that can take decisions, a real policy, serious policy. And despite the many disappointments of the past and of the present days, with determination, do not abandon having a vision, but on contrary, even more than before, let yourself be provoked by the cry of the poor and afflicted, because the Lord God does not forget the cry of the afflicted. But what we say to the powers of the world, I say first of all to ourselves. Then, as today, we also look for powerful and strong kingdom that makes us feel protected and safe. To the shepherds and to us, however, a contrary sign is offered, a defenseless and helpless newborn. We Christians shouldn't forget, we that are looking for strength, for power, that what we celebrate today here is this small child, the most fragile and humble and helpless sign we could have. All the glory sung by the angels, the entire heavenly army that was also mobilized on that night, all are focused on the child that was placed in the manger. We are then invited to a reversal logic of behavior. We are invited to a change of mentality and perspective. I know that what I say is not...
So that's the Archbishop Pier Battista Pizzaballa. He's speaking at the Church of Nativity in Bethlehem. He's giving the Christmas sermon. And listening into that is Huda Abdelhamid joining us as well from Bethlehem. The Archbishop, Huda, taking on a somewhat political message in his sermon.
Yes, absolutely, and it's probably the same political message that he had already yesterday, where he basically said that any unilateral decision again on Jerusalem should be off limit, regardless of any politics. And he also went on as saying that, you know, beyond the borders, beyond the issues of sovereignties, beyond the politics, well, Jerusalem is a universal symbol for billions of people around the planet, and that should be taken into account before making any kind of decision on the fate of that city. He also had some very harsh words yesterday towards U.S. Vice President Mike Pence. He said that he would advise Mike Pence to listen more to Christians and that there is no monopoly on Jesus, and certainly not by the evangelicals. He also went further by saying that should Mike Pence come to the region as scheduled in January, well, he would not be officially received at any of the Christian holy sites in the old city of Jerusalem. Now, joining me here is Javier Abu Aid. He is an advisor to the negotiating team. Javier, thank you very much for joining me. So, as an advisor to the negotiating team, will you be negotiating anytime soon?
At least not with Americans. They have totally disqualified themselves from any political process. It cannot be possible that they have decided from air just to recognize Jerusalem, a city which is a center for 3 monotheistic religions, and the occupied eastern part as the integral part of Israel's capital.
Now, we're seeing that certainly here there's a lot of unity among Palestinians. We've seen that the church has put its full weight behind the Palestinians on this particular issue of Jerusalem. And also we've seen the leadership really travel wide and far in the world trying to garner support. What are the real options that you guys have at this stage?
There are many options. Remember that the peace process started in Madrid and then you had something brokered by Norway. It's not only about the United States. You have many actors that want to play a role here. You have Russia, you have China, you have European countries that are around. But I think the main issue here is not what's going to happen if the US leaves. The US is already over. You have here 50 years of occupation. You have no accountability on the ground. You have Israel paying no price whatsoever for violating UN resolutions, and therefore I think that's a real question. The vote at the UN General Assembly showed that the international position is clear, but we have to translate this international position into political action. That's a real challenge now.
Certainly, it is a real challenge. Now, as we speak, there's a sermon going on inside the Church of the Nativity, and we already heard from Archbishop Pier Battista Pizzaballa very strong words in support of the Palestinians. What would you like to hear him say today at a time where his words are beamed around the world?
Let's remember that Christians in this region are Palestinians, and they have suffered perhaps more than any other person here or another group in Palestine since the Nakba, where 60% of the Christians became refugees, and now we are in a city surrounded by 18 illegal Israeli colonial settlements. We have a situation whereby Bethlehem cannot really grow anywhere because of the Israeli occupation, and therefore the church leaders have a responsibility, not only in terms of fighting for justice, which is one of the values that Jesus Christ brought according to the Christian tradition, but also in terms of saving their community. Their community is disappearing not because of Muslim oppression like Israeli propaganda would like to present, but because of the Israeli occupation. That's what all serious reports are going to tell you about.
Thank you very much, Javier. Now, certainly this square behind me, Manger Square, and the Church of Nativity are the epicenter of the Catholic faith today and tomorrow on Christmas Day. Usually they would be hundreds of pilgrims on the square behind me, some just standing outside of the church, some inside the church. Well, not this year. We are told that at least there was 50% of cancellations, if not more. Certainly a very damp mood here in Bethlehem, as damp as the weather. And as Javier said, if there's one city that also represents all the aspects of occupation, it's Bethlehem. It's a city that's completely hemmed in by settlements from all sides. occupied, and soon with more plans for more expansions of illegal settlements, it will be completely cut off from Jerusalem. You have also the separation wall, which is part of the daily life for everyone here in the city, and certainly now with all this new political upheaval, there is a lot of worry, not only in Bethlehem, but across the occupied West Bank about what the new year could bring for people here.
Okay, Huda Abdelhamid, thank you. Well, our special tonight has been focusing on Jerusalem and the wider issue of the Israeli occupation on Palestine. One major group of stakeholders in this conflict are the refugees and wider diaspora. The question of whether they'll ever be allowed to return to their homes is forefront on the minds of millions of Palestinians scattered across the globe. Zaina Khudr has more from Lebanon.
It's been 69 years in exile. Mufid Sadeh was 11 years old when his family fled Palestine to Lebanon. Ever since, he has lived the life of a refugee in a country that hasn't been welcoming. Sadeh still remembers the day he left his home in what is now Israel.
I still remember when the Israeli airstrikes targeted our village. We were sent into exile, leaving everything we owned behind. I remember every detail, even the trees, the streets, the farms, as if it was yesterday.
Sadeh buried two of his children here. Maher was killed during Lebanon's civil war in the 1980s, and Ammar died during the Lebanese-Israeli war 11 years ago. Palestinians were not only involved and caught up in Lebanon's own conflicts, they have been denied many basic rights to prevent their resettlement here long term.
As a Palestinian, I have seen nothing but humiliation, displacement, oppression, and deprivation. For 69 years, we lived unbearable, bitter moments away from our beloved Palestine. We will die for the sake of Palestine.
The first wave of Palestinian refugees arrived in 1948. They came with whatever they could carry, thinking it was only a short time before they could return. Small tent settlements were set up. In time, those settlements became densely populated neighborhoods.
It is estimated that 7 million Palestinians live in the diaspora. More than half are stateless. They have no citizenship in any country. According to the United Nations, the majority live in occupied Palestinian territory and in surrounding countries. Jordan hosts more than 3 million Palestinians. More than 500,000 live in Syria. Well, at least they used to. Because of the war, more than 100,000 fled to Europe and elsewhere. Around 50,000 of them sought refuge here in Lebanon.
It was an added strain to aid agencies that were already overstretched. Some 450,000 Palestinians are registered with the UN in Lebanon, but according to the first ever census by the Lebanese government, more than half of them have left the country in recent years.
More than 50% left due to the difficult economic conditions. They are deprived from the basic rights. They don't have job opportunities.
Mohammed Lubani says he is searching for a way out. He tried but failed to smuggle his family to Turkey from where he planned to reach Europe. He also tried to apply for immigration to Canada.
The economic conditions here are bad, and we're banned from working in many professions. We dream of travelling because here it's hard to provide our children with food. But just because I want to leave doesn't mean I have given up on Palestine and our right to return.
Palestinians hold on to that right adopted by the UN General Assembly. It has been decades, but many like Sadeh believe that one day Palestine will be theirs again, and one day his grandchildren or their children will bring his body back to his hometown.
And we'll now speak to Zaina. She's joining us from Burj al-Barajneh camp, that's in Lebanon. And Zaina, along with, of course, Jerusalem, the right of return for Palestinians is also the crux of the conflict.
Yes, a central issue in negotiations and also one of the most intractable issues. It is one of the causes why peace negotiations have failed. But there were 450,000 Palestinian refugees in Lebanon registered with the United Nations. But the first ever census done by the Lebanese government shows that there are 177,000 Palestinians now in the country. Most of these people over the years made their way to Europe, either illegally or legally, because they lost of hope, because life is difficult in Lebanon, but not because they've given up the right to return. Now, to talk more about that right is Mustafa Khalil, a Palestinian refugee. Mustafa, do you think Trump's decision is going to affect your right to return?
Sure, because this decision canceled our Palestinian entity
cancelled our Palestinian existence. This decision floored the whole case of Palestinian people, how Palestinian people demand to return to their homelands, and they don't have a capital, don't have a land, don't have a government.
So what should be done? Do you think that the protests that we're seeing and the confrontations between the Israeli troops and the Palestinian youths, is that enough?
No, it's not enough. It must be make like a revolutions, uprising, and don't stop. Always keep movement, that we have the right. This Jerusalem is our capital of our Palestinian land.
Mustafa Khalil, thank you very much. So Mustafa, one of the really thousands of refugees who live in Lebanon.
Hey, Zaina, thank you. Well, thousands of Palestinians have been living in the U.S. for generations. Some have been immigrating for better opportunities. And as they try and build their lives abroad, Palestine is never far from their minds, as Shihab Ratansi reports.
Hi, welcome.
Bashara Nasser left Bethlehem 7 years ago and now lives in northeast Washington, D.C. But his Christmas gatherings have remained constant.
This is a tradition that in Bethlehem we celebrate Christians and Muslims.
Nasser was born in Jerusalem but grew up in Bethlehem before moving to the U.S.
And I'm trying to bring some of these traditions to the United States, to my family here, and getting people together to celebrate Christmas.
Donald Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital has hit hard. He worries now about the prospect of never being able to return to his birthplace.
Jerusalem is a significant city for Christian, Muslim, and Jews. So as a Palestinian Christian, it's important for me to go and pray in Jerusalem, and also as Palestinian who was also born in Jerusalem, that I wanna be able to go.
But another guest here tonight found some comfort. President Trump's announcement has at least refocused international attention on the Israeli occupation.
There's heightened tensions over the holy sites, whether in Jerusalem or Bethlehem, other places. These events and these anniversaries become much more important, and more people participate, and people put a greater effort to celebrate them and to have the world see us celebrate them too.
Farsak points to this year's annual joint service of congregations from the National Cathedral in Washington, D.C. and the Evangelical Lutheran Christmas Church in Bethlehem. Farsak detected an extra edge from the sermons.
The reverends back home made a very important statement about how, on this Christmas day, how important it is that we realize that just like at the times of Jesus, we have the Caesars of this day and age that we as Christians, our people of faith, need to resist.
This was Nasser's Christmas wish.
I hope that everyone in Israel and Palestine, Christian, Muslim, Jews, Palestinians, and Israelis would one day live in equally. That means having access to water, access to electricity, access to build in their homes, to build in their lands, and that's what I want. To want equal rights for everyone to be living in equality, and whatever the solution is.
A Christmas dinner of Palestinian hope and resistance in the U.S. capital. Shihab Ratansi, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Let's go to Laura Burden-Manley for an in-depth tour of the holy sites.
Thanks, Doreen. Now, Jerusalem dates back to almost 3,000 years before Christ and is one of the most important cities in the world for the three monotheistic religions. That's Islam, Christianity, and Judaism. Now, inside the square-kilometre area of the Old City, you'll find one of the most important sanctuaries for all three religions. It's designated a World Heritage Site by UNESCO and is the third holiest site in Islam. It's the Al-Aqsa compound. It includes the Al-Aqsa Mosque, which is the domed building that dates back to the 7th century, and the Dome of the Rock, built in the same period, but the iconic shining golden roof was added in the 1960s. Now, next to this is what's commonly known as the Western Wall. It's the most important holy place for Jews, who believe it's the only surviving structure of a sacred temple. For Muslims, it's known as the Barak Wall, a place where they believe the Prophet Muhammad visited during the night of Ascension. Now, towards the Christian quarter of the Old City, you'll find the Via della Rosa. tracing the path Christians believe Jesus walked on his way to crucifixion. This ends at the entrance to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, the holiest site for Christians where they believe Christ was resurrected. But for many, the Holy Land stretches from the Mediterranean Sea to the River Jordan and holds some of the religion's most important sites. But many of these are rarely covered by Israeli tours, especially the areas past the separation wall. So let's take a look at these. Now, if we head southeast over the wall that divides the occupied West Bank to the south in the hills of Hebron, here lies the Ibrahimi Mosque, an important sanctuary for Muslims. Now, just over 2 decades ago, the Israeli settler Baruch Goldstein entered the mosque and shot and killed 29 worshippers. Now, after that, the Israelis divided the mosque, setting 60% of it for settlers residing there illegally to pray. They know it as the Tomb of the Patriarchs. Now, head north down the hills and you'll reach Shepherd's Fields in Bethlehem. Christians say here 3 shepherds followed a star to the city of Bethlehem and eventually to the Church of Nativity. Now, this sits over a cave known as the Grotto, where Christians believe Jesus was born more than almost 2,018 years ago. First commissioned in the 4th century, it's also a UN World Heritage Site and was the first to be listed under Palestine. Now, not far from here, built deep into the cliffs, lies one of the oldest inhabited monasteries in the world. That's Mar Saba. Now let's continue to head down the hills to the surroundings of the lowest city on earth, and that's Jericho. Here lies the Mount of Temptation, a seemingly gravity-defying monastery set up in the hills of the desert with views of the Jordan Valley and the Dead Sea. Now, this is where Jesus was said to be tempted by the devil. Now, if we travel west about an hour's drive past Jerusalem over the Israeli-Gaza separation wall, we reach one of the oldest churches in the world. That's St. Porphyrius. It dates back more than 1,600 years and serves Gaza's dwindling community of just over 1,000 Orthodox Christians. Now, not far from here lies the Great Mosque, Gaza's oldest and largest mosque. Built in the 7th century, it has been destroyed by conquerors and earthquakes many times, but it's been rebuilt and remains in use today. Now, although the Holy Land is important for all 3 religions, Muslims and Christians are often prevented from visiting these sites due to the Israeli occupation of the land.
Let's now cross over to Peter Sharp and bring him in. He's joining us live from the Vatican. That is where the Pope is going to be conducting the traditional midnight mass, Peter. But the Vatican certainly has taken a strong stance against the U.S.'s decision on Jerusalem.
They certainly have, and a strong stance, and one they took very, very quickly. Within hours of President Trump's announcement, the Vatican and the Pope in particular said that he was concerned about this event. And look, the Vatican is one of the smallest city-states in the world, but it has a very powerful voice. It represents 1.2 billion Catholics around the world, and over the last few days, really since December 6th, there's been very little day that they haven't managed to put this agenda out. It was in the United Nations. They were talking about maintaining the status of Jerusalem. In talks with the King of Jordan, that same message went across. And basically, it was unwavering and uncompromising. And what they're saying is that Jerusalem does not belong to a certain people. It belongs to all of us. And that's the message that the Pope has delivered and will continue to deliver. We're expecting tomorrow, and that's only in a few hours' time, that is his Christmas message. He will again bring up the question of Jerusalem. He took office in 2013. Every single Christmas message has included his thoughts and concerns about relations between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and his remarks tomorrow are going to be weighted with interest.
Okay, Peter Sharp, thank you for joining us and giving us the update from the Vatican City, and Merry Christmas to you. Well, let's just take a look at some of the most important UN resolutions regarding Palestine and Israel. So, Resolution 181, adopted by the UN General Assembly 70 years ago. And this led to the partition of Palestinian territory into two distinct Jewish and Arab states. Jerusalem was kept under international control. Then comes the Security Council Resolution 242 in 1967. It called for the withdrawal of Israeli forces from the land it captured after the Six-Day War. But today, that occupation still continues. Then comes Resolution 446 of 1979, when the UN said Israel's illegal settlements in Palestinian and Arab land have no legal validity. And there have been dozens more, which brings us to now. On Thursday, in a stinging rebuke to the U.S. administration, 128 countries voted in favor, declaring null and void Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital.
In favor, 128. Against, 9.
That vote coming despite the Trump administration's threat to cut aid if countries voted in favor of the draft resolution. Even though it's non-binding, the vote was hugely symbolic in indicating America's unilateral declaration went against international consensus. Joining us now from Santa Barbara in California is Richard Falk. He's the former UN Special Rapporteur on the occupied Palestinian territories. Thanks very much for joining us on Al Jazeera. So you wrote at the beginning of the year that the UN General Assembly is failing, but let's not give up. So when you look at the Palestinian issue at the United Nations and the recent developments with the UNGA resolution on Thursday, can you just give me your initial reading of that?
Well, I think it's an enormous symbolic victory for those supporting the Palestinian struggle. And it's a great setback for the kind of bullying geopolitics that President Trump was pursuing by unilaterally recognizing Jerusalem as the capital of Israel. It was a bluff that has been called. Every important country in the world, without exception, supported the resolution, including America's closest allies, France, UK, Japan, and many others. So this is a very important moment. And what happens next, of course, is unclear. But what is clear is that not only does the UN fulfill its role as determining rights and legitimate grievances, but it also sends a signal to other governments and to civil society that this is an issue that deserves full and unconditional support.
You, of course, were the chief author of a report that was accusing Israel of being an apartheid state, a report that we know that was rejected by the United Nations Secretary General himself. What changes come about from these types of reports?
Well, the report, first of all, wasn't rejected. It was removed from the UN website.
But the UN Secretary General did distance himself from it.
He distanced himself from it procedurally. He said he hadn't been properly consulted. You can interpret it different ways. And in effect, it was a slap at the report, and the director of the commission in the Middle East resigned as a result of that. But nevertheless, the report has made more normal the understanding that the subjugation of the Palestinian people as a whole on the basis of their ethnic identity is indeed a form of apartheid that blocks the path to peace. And what the report argues is that genuine peace will depend on dismantling this structure, just as happened in South Africa under somewhat similar circumstances where a people was being subjugated for the sake of racial domination.
What changed when it came to South Africa in terms of the international community? Apologies, but what changed when it came to South Africa that people are wondering can be applied to the Palestinian situation?
Well, in South Africa, as now in the Palestinian situation, until it changed, no one expected the South African political leadership to accept the idea that apartheid was a crime and should be dissolved. They never expected Nelson Mandela to be released from prison. What they expected was an armed struggle for the future of South Africa. And what changed the South African opinion on the part of its leaders was the accumulation of pressure and isolation that resulted from the UN anti-apartheid. And so if one looks at this Jerusalem resolution as a step in that direction, it is an occasion for some hope that the Palestinians will be finally liberated from this long ordeal.
All right, Richard Falk, we thank you very much for joining us from Santa Barbara and wishing you a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays as well. Well, that's the scene right now in Bethlehem from the Church of Nativity. You've been watching an Al Jazeera news special, The Holy Land. We wish you a Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays, and we'll leave you with this montage.
I have determined that it is time to officially recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel.
Il benedicio Dei Omnipotentis, Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sanctis.